We now look at our good dead friend, David Hume. First, a bit of background for Hume. He was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland, to a Calvinist family. He attended Edinburgh University, and there he studied literature and philosophy. He went to France and wrote a treatise of human nature, and like many aspiring, ambitious people of that time, and our time as well, he hoped to achieve literary fame. In fact, he called it his ruling passion. And as so often happens, it ended up being met with not anger or hate, but the worst of all fates, namely indifference. In his phrase, the work fell dead-born from the press. So rather disappointing. In 1745, because of his skeptical and religious views, he was denied a position in ethics at Edinburgh University. In 1748, he engaged in a classic bit of author tactics, which is essentially, if a work fails, and it's not completely and utterly horrible, or even perhaps if it is, revise it. Maybe split it into different parts and see if you can solve those. And that's what he did. He took the first two parts of the treatise, revised them in a more popular style, and released it as an inquiry concerning human understanding, and it ended up becoming fairly successful. In 1751, he continued this strategy and revised the third part of the treatise as an inquiry concerning the principles of morals. Now, all three of these books, the original Total Failure, well, not really Total Failure because it's a success today, and the revisions are still in print to this day. Of course, he doesn't get any royalties for them because he is rather dead. Also, they're way out of copyright. In 1752, he tried to get a position at the University of Glasgow and was denied. In 1757, he published his Natural History of Religion, which is an account of the genesis of the religious impulse. After his death, his work, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, were published as well. Now, he was probably best known in his time for his publication of the 6-volume History of England, published over the course of 1754 to 1762. And this work was very successful at the time. In 1763, he went to Paris as the assistant to the English ambassador and was a celebrity at the time. He also apparently corresponded with other notables, including our own Benjamin Franklin. In 1776, he died, not because of the revolution, but because of most likely cancer or ulcerative colitis. He was a very well-liked person, seen as very kind and gentle, and he was nicknamed Saint David, and his street still bears this name. He has a tomb that's still there. You could go, well, someday you could visit it perhaps. And a while back they were raising money because people kept throwing trash and bottles of wine and so forth into it. Although Hume would probably be fine with the bottles of wine. So that's a bit of background for Hume, the guy. So what about his philosophical goals and motivations? Well, as a kind of a recurring theme among philosophers and scientists during the time Hume was Huming, like our good dead friend Descartes, our good dead friend Hobbes, and Berkeley, etc., he believed that the foundations of science and philosophy were pretty shaky. To quote him, it doesn't be translated because he's writing in English. He says, "There is nothing which is not the subject of debate, in which men of learning are not of contrary opinions. Disputes are multiplied as if everything was uncertain." So much like Descartes and others, he looks at the state of philosophy and science of his time and says, essentially, this is a mess. So what was his approach to this? Well, unlike many other thinkers, he took the view that the problem was we don't adequately understand human nature. His stated goal involved a military metaphor, which is this. He wanted to take the capital or center of these sciences to human nature itself. He held that once this was done, victory over all else would be easy. And his goal ultimately was to provide the foundation for all of the sciences. So rather similar to our dead friend Descartes and other thinkers. So now we turn to look at David Hume's theory of causation. This, of course, smushes together his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, that's to say, and his metaphysics. Now, Hume claims that when it comes to external objects, stuff out there, that we never observe a necessary connection between these objects. One merely follows another. To use one of his very common examples, we have the impression of the motion of one billiard ball followed by the motion of another. Billiards is different from pool. There's some difference in the gameplay and the table, but essentially you can think of them as being kind of the same type of thing. So if you know about pool, it works as a good example here. Now, if we could discover the cause, then we'd be able to predict the effect from reason alone. We could do it a priori. But Hume notes that when you observe particular instances of things occurring, like, someone takes a shot at like billiards or pool and hits, you see the stick hits the ball hits other balls, things move around. He claims that our observation of these particular instances, it gives us no idea of necessary connection. All we end up have happening is this. We just see, one thing followed by another. Now, what about internal impressions, things going on in one's mind? Now, he says this won't work either. An idea of a necessary connection cannot be derived from the reflection on the mind's operation, and you can't copy it from an internal impression. Now, a person might claim that we're aware of some sort of inner power that enables us to, move your hand around or imagine new ideas. What are we actually conscious of, though? Well, we are conscious that bodily motion follows the command of the will. And you can try this yourself at home, wherever you are. You can think about moving your hand, and your hand probably moves. But he says there are 3 reasons why we cannot find this necessary connection internally. And here are the 3. First for him is the mind-body problem. We first looked at this with our good dead friend Descartes. The problem being how, in the case of Descartes, does the ghostly incorporeal mind move, control, interact with the physical body? And Hume raises this problem as well. The method by which a spiritual substance somehow influences or interacts with a material one is extremely mysterious. And he does kind of an argument from incredulity. He says that a power to move mountains or control planets' orbits would be no more extraordinary or incomprehensible. So essentially he's saying this is really extremely weird. So if we perceived any power in the will, what would we have to know? Well, he claims we'd have to know this: the power and its connection with the effect, the union of the soul and the body, and the nature of both substances, and how they can operate on each other. But of course his view is that this is all very mysterious, and so we can't get any notion of necessary connection by looking within. And so the first argument essentially is the mind-body problem shows all these problems, so you can't do that. Second argument, the argument from voluntary control. Now, we do know that we can only move certain organs voluntarily, and others we can't. So, for example, we can will to talk, and so our tongue and mouth moves, and our fingers and feet and so forth move at our command for the most part. But we don't have the ability to will our heart to do things, or the ability to will our liver to detoxify us faster or better. And what he claims is, even though we're well aware of this, he says we're not conscious of any power present in the cases where we can engage in voluntary control, like moving one's hand or speaking, that's lacking in cases where we don't have this. Obviously someone would say, well, You could talk about how the nervous system works in the brain, etc., in the presence of, muscles and actuators and so forth. But Hume's point is not that we don't understand, say, the physiology of it, because even if you pointed out to Hume, here's the physiology of how this works, Hume would say, wow, that's fascinating. Of course, he wouldn't say much because he's dead, but he'd probably say that's fascinating. But his point is not that we don't understand the physiology of it. It's just that if we look in our mind, so to speak, we don't see, this power that works in some cases when you want to move our hand, but not in others, or so he claims. Third, he claims the process is unknown. So when you engage in voluntary motion, the immediate object of this power is not the moved member, but Hume was aware of the anatomy and physiology they knew at the time he was around, so he knew about muscles, nerves, etc. But he claims that because we don't know what's going on, the power of how this all works is mysterious. So he presents kind of a detailed argument here about how this is a problem. So the mind wills event X. X is some variable. Think of whatever event you want, like moving one's hand or speaking some words. So the mind wills event X, and a series of unknown and totally different events from X occur, and then X occurs. If the original power is felt, and its effect must be known, since power is relative to its effect. If the effect is unknown, the power cannot be known nor felt. We cannot be conscious of a power to move our limbs. We only have a power to move, using a kind of a Cartesian term, animal spirits, whose operations are incomprehensible. So the gist of his reasoning is we just don't know how this works. And again, he's not saying he doesn't understand like there's muscles and nerves, etc., but it's the actual, we observe this happening, and you could have a detailed, MRI scan of the body with all this stuff happening, and humans would still say we still don't know the power. The power here is unknown. So our idea of power, according to him, is not copied from a consciousness of power in us when we give rise to motion. The motion follows the will is a matter of experience, like other natural events. And according to him, the power, as in all natural events, is unknown and inconceivable. He continues his arguments. Now, in the case of causes, most find it easy to account for common operations of nature. At least they think they can. Things like objects falling, plants growing, animals being born, that food nourishes. And people suppose they perceive the force of the cause infallibly connecting it to effect. They acquire habit. When the cause appears, they expect its usual effect. Now, what about extraordinary phenomena, such as earthquakes, pestilence, and prodigies? Now, he says in those cases where things are extraordinary, people cannot assign a cause and explain the effect. In such cases, he notes, it's common to present an invisible, intelligent principle, that is to say, God, as the cause. And people think that the phenomena, the extraordinary phenomena, cannot be accounted for by the common powers of nature. So he's contrasting everyday stuff like eating a sandwich, and providing nutrition, versus extraordinary stuff, earthquakes, pestilence, and so on. Now, in the case of philosophers, at least according to Hume, he doesn't really cite who he's talking about, just the philosophers. He claims that philosophers realize that even in familiar events, the energy of the cause is as unintelligible as in the most unusual. So his point here is that people generally think that in really extraordinary cases, they don't know. But Hume says same applies to the seemingly normal. So why does this occur? Well, he claims we learn by experience the frequent conjunction of objects. So stuff we experience regularly, we think because of familiarity, we understand it. things that occur, very rarely and are very strange, we don't experience them often, and so we don't have experience with them. So we think we don't understand them. But according to Hume, we actually, whether it's a normal thing like eating the sandwich or something, extraordinarily bizarre, we do not comprehend any connection in these cases, whether it's something, again, mundane every day like eating a sandwich or something truly extraordinary. So what he's pushing at is that we simply don't see a necessary connection between occurrences. One thing happens, another thing happens, and we don't see the necessity. So his position, to recap, is that no idea of power or necessary connection has been found in the sources from which it could be derived. So his view is that, if we look to the outside, we can't find the necessary connection. We look to the inside, the workings of our own minds, and we also cannot find the necessary connections. So then he turns to probably his best known part of talking about causation, which is this. In a single instance of the operation of bodies, like one thing happens, one time, all we can discover is one event following another, and we cannot comprehend a power by which the cause operates or a connection between it and its supposed effect. Now, turning back again to mind and body, he says the same difficulty occurs with the operations of mind on body. The motion of the body is observed to follow the volition of the mind, but we cannot observe or conceive the tie or energy that is supposed to produce this effect. So, the authority of the will over the body is no more comprehensible than the operation of bodies. And so, at this point, he has concluded there is no idea of necessary connection, whether on the outside or the inside. So, what are the sort of results of this? Well, he claims there is no conceivable instance of connection, and all events seem separate. One event follows another, but no tie can be observed. They seem conjoined, but never connected. So his conclusion, but not the end of this piece, because he draws a conclusion, then moves on to more. I know somewhat confusion in his conclusion. He concludes that we cannot have an idea of anything never appearing to outward sense or inward sentiment. Because of this, the necessary conclusion must be this. We have no idea of connection or power. The words connection and the word power have no meaning in philosophy or common life, or so he claims.